So I thought that was all good. And with regards to your point about like, Mariano coming in and maybe Isco becoming a little bit, you didn't say redundant, but I know like his role shifted a little bit after the red card and maybe he wasn't as important. The way I said it was like, I don't know if it's Isco in particular, but the idea of a false nine becomes less urgent in this scenario because you're not dealing with the press anymore. You don't need someone to drop deep constantly. And your transition offense isn't going to come to a complete halt if you put Mariano in there. So to me, the most logical sub was actually Asensio Camilla, who was might as well been you or me out there instead of Asensio. And so to me, that was the most logical sub, was bring off Asensio for Mariano and keep Isco there. But also at the same time, I kind of figured in my mind that there was a predetermined like scheduled sub for Isco coming, because this is something that Zidane does. He pre-schedules subs before the game even starts, knowing like, okay, this player is just returning from several games not in action, so he's going to come off at this stage, and that's predetermined. But ultimately, like, him and Asensio came off together. But I also thought it was a game where you start to appreciate Benzema a little bit more, because bringing on Mariano in this situation is a little bit of a double-edged sword. So you gain a target in the box, you lose some of the control and the creativity outside of it. And Benzema kind of does both. Benzema is the kind of guy who can roam in and out of the box. He's been fantastic in the air this season and last season. And he just knows how to kind of connect things and marshal the team offensively. So I that's something I was curious to know if you had any thoughts on Benzema missing. Obviously, we all know Benzema is important, but how much do you think his absence affected Real Madrid's game plan today?
Well, obviously, it affected in the sense that Isco had to play false nine. I wouldn't have really been, going off about like Diamond versus 4-3-3 so much if Benzema was in, right? Because they're pressing us high. Benzema can do that thing, right? He can alternate between occupying the last line, dropping off. He does it really well, and so like I'd have a lot more faith. I wouldn't have as much questions about that. And so if he's there, like, actually, because before the game, I was really feeling that Atalanta would take it without Benzema. I was feeling really down without him. If Benzema was in the side, despite all our issues, I would have faith that we could beat Atalanta and really exploit their press, which I think is where the game is always to be won versus them. And then after the red card, yeah, I mean, it's just, I don't have much to add besides like, you just don't have trade-offs with him in terms of, okay, do I think about losing control, creativity? He gives you both. I think Mariano is better in the box, but I think Benzema is really, really underrated in the air, which I think happens when you play next to Cristiano Ronaldo for most of your career. And then, also you have Sergio Ramos and Casemiro overshadowing you on set pieces. I think Benzema is up there, not, just elite of the elite in the air, but if we actually look at how he scored so many of his goals, he's been good in the box, and some of his headers have been fantastic. So, yeah, I don't have much to add because of that, but I really do feel like Benzema is made for these types of games. He's made for Champions League nights where the opposition can approach you in any single way, and you have to be flexible tactically, right? And being flexible tactically is only possible when you have flexible players on the pitch. And that's part of the reason Zidane loves Benzema so much, because he can kind of play any which way with him. And so, yeah, he was definitely missed tonight, though I do think he was more missed in the first 17 minutes because, yeah, you lose control and all of that, but I just didn't feel that threatened. And I think ultimately, and ironically somewhat given my criticisms, that the path to victory here was just pummeling balls into the box and crossing, and Mariano is good enough for that. And again, as we'll get to, we didn't really do that in the second half for whatever reason. I think Atalanta affected that somewhat, but again, we'll get to that.
Well, where would you like to go from here? I'm just kind of excited to fast forward to the Mendy goal, but Liam, what do you want to say about the second half or leading up to it?
Maybe this is just because, I mean, I did go back and rewatch a lot of this, but I did clock out, initially, like, for some of that first half, because I was just so frustrated by the fact that it had gone back to the same dynamic we'd always seen. And I was like, what am I going to analyze here? I was being like super selfish and stuff. But so maybe it's affected by that because I paid more attention to the start of the second half. But I felt that Atalanta's defending in a deep block was a lot better because they were a lot more aggressive. And again, like, correct me if you just didn't see that at all, right? And I'm just making that up. But it was interesting to me because, like, for example, we take Bielsa's Leeds, right? Like, there's been a ton of discussion about, oh, is their man-to-man high press actually a good thing? Why doesn't he defend more reactively, more conservatively? And a lot of the discussion has been, is like, it's just not realistic to go from one game high pressing to one game defending in a deep block, because you've kind of trained your players to react to certain triggers, to be more aggressive, and that's just not how you defend in deeper stances. I think there's a lot of validity to that, but I also think that's overly simplistic. And today was an interesting case study because Atalanta, very aggressive, high-pressing team, a man-to-man high-pressing team like Leeds, and I thought their aggression actually served them well when defending so deep near their box, because I think a trap teams fall into is like, we're just going to sit back and just let you pass the ball around comfortably. And then that's what allows you to deliver comfortable, unpressured balls into the box. Now, you still have numbers, but it allows more and more volume, which then slowly increases the chances of those resulting in something. And what I noticed in the second half was Atalanta were pressing it like right in front of their own box, right? Like, whenever we passed in front of the box, Modric, Kroos, Isco didn't actually have that much time to move the ball about, look up, think about the pass. And I think they did a really good job. And so there wasn't an easy way for us to get separation for a delivery just through passing, right? Like, you weren't going to play a lead pass into someone out wide and just the separation would automatically be there. You'd have to do something more. Maybe you need a 1-versus-1 threat, which would lead to a different discussion about Vinicius being taken off. So I thought they did that well, and credit to them for that. Ultimately, though, it's 10 men, right? It's, if we're being frank, one of the easiest tasks in world football, which we expect a professional team to do, is to be able to consistently utilize the extra player, to be able to gain offensive advantages. And there were still plenty of times, as much as Atalanta pressed and tried to deny us clear opportunities, there were plenty of times where our players had time to cross, they looked up, decided not to do it, and we recycled possession. And then, yeah, I mean, there's no way to kind of fit this in neatly because I kind of missed my chance to include it. But the other thing with Atalanta is I think they did a really good job of forcing us from side to side. We like to do that anyway, but they were doing it on their terms. So we weren't as kind of ready to be able to decisively switch and create space. So that's my compliments to them. Whenever your team doesn't perform to expectations, it's not just because you did poorly in some aspects. Usually the other team did some good things. And I think Atalanta's deep block defending was good. But ultimately, even when you take all of that into account, there's just this weird lack of intent to put crosses and balls into the box that I just do not understand. I don't know if Zidane was asked that at the press conference, but it really didn't make sense to me. We only had 9 open play crosses in the second half, which against us, we had more than 72% possession. It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and he was asked about that or I think the question was, so it was actually the first question of the press conference where the classic, you know how everyone says it's harder to play against 10 men than it is to play against 11 men. So I think that was the first question. He said Zidane's answer was something like, it really depends on the context and situation, game to game and stuff. And he said just the game changed. He didn't really specify too much how it changed, but he did say, like, initially that their game plan was before the red card to get Isco to feed the ball into Mariano and Vinicius and Asensio in transition. And that changed obviously after the red card. But I think like the way what you're talking about in terms of Atalanta's defensive shape in the second half, to me also coincides a little bit. Like, there was a lull in the second half where it was just nothing happening, right? And I mean, first of all, Atalanta's XG in this entire game was 0.13. So they were putting all their cards in their own third, trying to just close as much space as possible. And Real Madrid weren't really doing anything in the final third. And I felt it like dropped off even further when Vinicius was taken out. So when we saw Mariano enter the field, I think, me anyway, I don't know how everyone feels, I thought, again, it would have been most logical to bring him on for Asensio. It turns out it was Vinicius. Now, say what you want about Vinicius. I thought this is in some ways a classic Vinicius game in that the intent was there, the efficiency maybe so not, but I also think that's a little bit harsh. I mean, the one chance he had in the Isco through ball was not an easy chance. It was deflected. He had a few good dribbling sequences. I thought he looked confident. At the very least, we noticed Real Madrid were doing something when he was on the field, or he was doing something, right? And